shouldn't be seen leaving work this early.
Falseface, whose real name is unknown, was hired by Cobra to smuggle a deadly supervirus into Gotham City. Much like Clayface, Falseface has the ability to change the shape and coloration of his face at will through some unknown power or technique. Very little is truly known about Falseface, so unlike usual, the summary actually ends there. With that ever so brief summary out the way, let me quickly go ahead and mention the episode that I'll be going over and discuss how I'll break it down. The episode we'll be looking at today is titled Plague. Now, there will be some skipping within the episode itself, as there's a lot happening within this episode, and as always, we're trying to stay focused on our villain of the day rather than the entirety of the episode. With that said, let's dive right into Plague. The episode begins with Terry, Dana, and Chelsea waiting for Nelson to return from Saint Denis at the airport. Nelson goes to customs, and the agent finds a vial of an unidentified green fluid. Nelson claims to not know anything about it and suggests that it was snuck into his bag while he was in the bathroom. The customs agent appears to believe Nelson and lets him go while confiscating the vial. After Nelson leaves, the customs agent turns over the vial to a Cobra agent and reveals that he's capable of molding his face into others. Nelson then catches up with the group and heads out, but is intercepted by Stalker before he reaches his car. Batman soon arrives and attacks Stalker, who claims he doesn't want to fight. Batman doesn't believe him, but Agent Bennett arrives and says that Stalker is telling the truth. He explains that Stalker is working for the NSA to help track down Falseface, a face-changing mercenary working for Cobra. Agent Bennett then explains that Cobra intends to release a lethal supervirus onto the city unless they're paid 10 billion credits. Agent Bennett then says that the virus has already been tested on a small island community and the virus had eradicated all life on the island. The main takeaway from all of this is that Falseface is aware of Cobra's plan, and yet he's still okay with it all. This lets us know that Falseface has a serious mental disconnect, as he's more than okay with Gotham being plagued by this virus as long as he gets paid. As I said, there's very little truly known about Falseface, but what seems to motivate him is his obsession of money. His greed seems to have consumed him, and so now we're left with a hollow man who only has a desire for money and is more than willing to watch however many die to achieve his riches. Skipping ahead, at Gotham Plastics, Falseface disables the security system and lets Cobra in. Once inside, Falseface marvels at the unmarked credits and learns that Cobra intends to coat them with the virus. This way, every time that the credits are passed from hand to hand, the virus will be transmitted. This scene not only highlights what I said earlier about Falseface being obsessed with money, but it also highlights the mental disconnect that I was talking about as well. In this moment, Cobra 1 is telling Falseface how they plan to infect millions with a virus that will kill them, and yet, Falseface doesn't bat an eye. Again, all he cares about is getting paid. Batman and Stalker then arrive and fight the agents. During the fight, however, the vial is nearly smashed open, and Stalker is deterred from capturing Falseface in concern of Batman failing to save it. Fortunately, Stalker manages to hit Falseface with one of his tracking grenades, and Batman manages to prevent the virus from being unleashed. However, Cobra 1 then explains that they infected Falseface as a backup, and since Falseface has left the building, he can easily evade capture and will infect others. Stalker and Batman then go after Falseface and find him. Unfortunately, Falseface refuses to believe Stalker when Stalker says that he's infected, and Falseface disables Stalker with his taser. Batman continues on after Falseface, but temporarily loses sight of him. Fortunately, Falseface tries to imitate Nelson, a disguise that Batman can easily see through. A fight then ensues that takes the combatants into a factory. Once inside said factory, Falseface starts a fire and then attacks Batman with a lead pipe. There's not really much else to say about Falseface during this and the next few scenes, as he doesn't really talk. However, the one thing we can touch on is how quick Falseface was to reject the idea of him being infected. This very well could just be simple villain arrogance, or it could be that Falseface possibly thought that he couldn't be infected due to his powers. Falseface genuinely might have thought, especially after feeling fine before and during all of this, that he was immune to the virus. However, it's unclear for certain, and if I had to take my best guess, it would be just simple villain arrogance, as there's not much depth to Falseface. Also, another thing to add, after Batman hits Falseface, his face becomes morphed, and it's honestly such a cool visual. It's almost horror-like, which is a perfect touch. It also kinda gives me Two-Face vibes. But anyways, back to the episode. Batman obviously holds up his own, but after an explosion, he gets trapped under a falling ventilation duct. Falseface prepares to kill Batman, but Falseface suddenly leans over in pain. Batman then explains that the virus has taken hold. Falseface replies by saying Cobra 1 wouldn't do this to him and then runs away. Meanwhile, unable to free himself, Batman believes himself to be doomed, but Stalker arrives and saves him. The two things of note here are firstly, Falseface refusing to accept that Cobra 1 betrayed him tells us how it really was just simple villain arrogance. And secondly, after Falseface gets hit again, his face morphs once more. This time, however, with flames in the background, which adds to the horror element that again just works so perfectly. Back to the episode. After being saved by Stalker, the two escape, and once outside, they find Falseface collapsed. And that would be the last time we ever saw Falseface within Batman Beyond. I know I've said this a few times, but there's really not much to say about Falseface. He's a rather simple villain with a rather simple motive, but for what it's worth, he's overly greedy, highly obsessed, sadistic, and mentally unstable. And it was that same greed and obsession that consumed him until he was eventually led to his death by his own desires. Before moving on to his design and voice actor, here's some random trivia. Falseface was a one-off villain that fell into complete obscurity until the 1966 Batman series used him, where he gained some attraction. And the second and last piece of trivia that we'll be going over is the following. The DCAU's take on Falseface seems to be more inspired by the popular Spider-Man villain, the Chameleon. And now we'll move on to Falseface's design and voice actor. The design of Falseface is as I always say. It's simple, yet effective. Unlike the design of Stalker or Cobra 1, the design of Falseface places him in an outfit that you'd actually see someone wearing in real life. And as I said earlier, there's also the horror aspect to his face, which happens after he gets punched. And I'll say again, in my opinion at least, that was such a nice touch. As I just said a second ago, it's all simple, yet effective. And now we'll move on to Falseface's voice actor. Falseface was voiced by Townsend Coleman, who played Michelangelo in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 1987, Muggsy in the new Batman Adventures, and both the young and middle-aged versions of Silvermane in Spider-Man 1994, as well as many other great roles. So huge shout out to Townsend Coleman. With all that said though, this has been the fiendish familiarity of Falseface. If you made it this far into the video, comment down your favorite obscure Batman villain and list why. I always love to hear y'all's opinions. Also, like always, huge shout out to Mercenary X84 and Best Man Gamer for still being members. I seriously appreciate y'all's love and support, as it truly means the world to me. So again, thank you. Also, I plan on doing more with the membership later on down the line. I just gotta figure out how I want to work everything out on that end. I might change the membership shoutouts to the first tier because that's where I originally thought I had placed it. I'll probably do that next week. I already made a few changes and I hope y'all enjoy them. But anyways, thank you to each and every one of you for watching. I really appreciate it. And with my ramblings finally, and I do mean finally out the way, it's been ugly, and I'll see y'all in the next one.